Market day was the busiest day of the week. The square filled early, before the sun had fully lifted, with carts creaking in from the lanes and stalls opening one by one. Chickens squawked in wicker cages, fish gleamed on slabs of wood, cloth hung in bright folds, and the air was thick with shouts, haggles, and the rustle of coins. Children wove between baskets and barrels, chasing one another. Old women leaned on sticks, weighing turnips in their palms. Dogs nosed the ground for scraps, tails low, eyes sharp for a careless hand. It was a day like every other market day, until the hare ran through. It came fast, from no one knew where, a flash of brown fur slipping between the feet of a butcher, scattering his knives, then darting beneath the cart of a spice seller. The women cried out, clutching their skirts, while the men cursed as the animal streaked past their stalls. A child laughed and pointed, "Catch it!" And soon half the square was chasing. The hare ran without pause, weaving like smoke, slipping always out of reach. A dog leapt for it and missed, crashing into a pile of baskets. A boy flung a stone that struck only dust. Merchants shouted in anger, their goods overturned in the chase, while the creature threaded through them all as if the square belonged to it. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped, at the very center of the square. It sat back on its haunches, ears upright, chest heaving. For a heartbeat, the whole market froze. The people stared at the animal, and the animal stared back, its dark eyes reflecting the crowd, as if it had gathered them not by accident but by design. And then it was gone. A single leap carried it between the stalls, and in a blink the hare had vanished. No one saw which way it ran, through which street, through which alley. The square was left in disarray, turnips spilled across the cobbles, baskets broken, bread trampled underfoot. The people muttered, shaken by how quickly the order of their day had been undone. That evening, as the market emptied and families gathered their goods, no one spoke of the hare without unease. Some swore it had looked too calm, too knowing. Others said its eyes had lingered too long, as if it carried some message in silence. But all agreed it was no ordinary creature. And when night fell, and the first travelers set out from the village along the familiar road, they did not reach their neighbors' fields. They did not reach the river, nor the forest, nor the distant towns. For though they walked long and steady, when they lifted their heads again, they were back at the square, staring at the very place where the hare had sat. The first to return were merchants. At dusk, when their wagons should have been halfway to the next village, they appeared again in the square, their horses sweating, their brows furrowed. At first they laughed uneasily, claiming they had taken a wrong turn, that the day's confusion had muddled them. But when they set out again, retracing the same familiar road they had traveled all their lives, they came back once more, wheels rattling over the cobblestones of the market as though they had never left. By midnight, it was not only merchants. A family carrying baskets of grain appeared at the well, their faces pale with confusion. "We went to my sister's," the father insisted, but when asked which path they had taken, his words faltered. "The road bent. It bent and turned," he muttered, though he could not explain how. Others tried as well. Some walked on foot, some with lanterns held high. Some crossed the bridge and followed the river, certain that water would lead them out. But the river, too, curved strangely, circling them back until they found themselves once again before the same row of houses, the same crooked stalls, the same silent square. By dawn, the truth pressed into every heart, the roads no longer led outward. Whispers filled the market. "The hare did it," said the old women, their hands trembling as they shelled beans. "I saw its eyes, black, clever, unnatural." Men muttered that a hare was only an animal, nothing more. Yet even they did not step beyond the square that day. Children, braver or less burdened by fear, searched for it. They claimed to see its shadow darting in the alleys, slipping between doorways, pausing near the church steps before vanishing again. Mothers dragged them inside, whispering warnings. And when evening fell, and a group of young men set out boldly with ropes and sticks, swearing they would break through, the village held its breath. Hours passed. Then, before midnight, the men returned, weary and silent, walking into the square as though they had been gone only moments. No one asked what they had seen. The square was no longer the heart of the village. It had become the whole of it. And the hare, whether seen or unseen, was never far from anyone's thoughts. In the days that followed, the village grew restless. Men who once traded in neighboring towns now sat idly in the square, their wagons unhitched, their goods unsold. Women who carried baskets to visit kin across the fields stayed home, staring at the lanes that no longer promised arrival. Children who once raced to the river for play were called back before they could run too far, for every path led only to return. Still, the people tried. They marked trees with knives and rags, swore they would not be fooled again. They carried compasses, maps, and lanterns. They walked until their legs ached, pushing through woods and fields, striding until the stars wheeled overhead. Yet always, without fail, the road bent back. A turn where no turn should be, a fork where none had ever stood, a bend in the river too sharp to be natural. And at last, when hope gave way to dread, the square greeted them again, the same stones, the same stalls, the same air heavy with the memory of the hare's leap. The market stood, but it was empty of trade. No strangers arrived, no carts came from beyond. The villagers tilled what land lay close, but none dared wander too far. Grain was threshed in the square itself, fish smoked in its corners, cloth stretched to dry over its stones. The lanes that had once led outward now circled back like tethered ropes. At first, some laughed bitterly. So be it, they said. We need no roads if we have ourselves. But as days turned to weeks, the laughter thinned. A world without roads was not a world whole. It was a trap, and the walls of it were invisible. Children, who sensed what adults tried not to speak, began to whisper about the hare. They swore it still darted through the alleys, quick as ever, though no hand could catch it. They gave it names, called it the runner, the turning one, the keeper of paths. Mothers hushed them, but the children only laughed. And always, when the sun sank and the square dimmed, the people felt the strangeness most. For in the night, when the air grew still, they could hear footsteps, soft, swift, and circling, though none among them walked. It was then they began to understand, the hare had not simply run through the market. It had redrawn the world around them. At first, the village held together under its unease. People shared their confusion, their failed journeys, their fear of the roads. But as days stretched into weeks, unity frayed. Some began to speak of the hare with reverence. They claimed it was no ordinary animal but a messenger, sent to draw the people inward, to keep them safe from dangers beyond. The roads were never ours, they whispered at the well. The hare has shown us the truth, we belong here. These voices called the square a sanctuary, the place chosen for them. Others spat at such words. A curse, not a gift, they answered. The beast bewitched us. What kind of safety is a cage? These men sharpened their tools, muttering that the hare must be found and killed, its skin nailed to the church doors to break the spell. The quarrels grew loud. In the tavern, brothers turned fists against one another. At the ovens, women accused neighbors of feeding the hare scraps to keep it strong. Children repeated both sides in play, some pretending to chase the hare with sticks, others to kneel before it as if before a saint. The square itself grew heavy with division. Stalls once crowded with trade now stood as places of argument. One corner gathered the devout, who prayed for the hare to return and lead them to understanding. Another filled with those who plotted hunts, swearing to scour every alley until the animal was dead. But the hare appeared to neither side. It was glimpsed only in flashes, a shadow slipping behind a barrel, a rustle in the weeds, a pair of eyes glinting in moonlight. Always near, never caught. And the more it was unseen, the more certain each side became of its own truth. The bell tower in the square had long stood as the measure of time, striking each hour. Now its silence deepened the rift. Without its rhythm, people quarreled over the very shape of the day. One family ate while another fasted, one rose while another slept. The world had bent inward, and with it, so had the minds of the people. The village was still one place, yet already it was splitting in two, those who bowed to the hare, and those who swore to destroy it. And though no one admitted it aloud, all feared the same thing, that whichever side proved wrong would not live to see the road straight again. It began with whispers, and ended with flames. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the quarrels of the day carried into the night. A group of men, restless and bitter, swore they had seen the hare near the church wall. They gathered torches, their faces set, and called others to join them. If we cannot walk the roads, they shouted, then we will burn out the beast that binds them. Soon the square was lit with firelight, the stalls casting long, leaping shadows across the cobbles. Women clutched their children to the doorframes, watching as the men circled with ropes and sticks. Dogs barked and snapped at the smoke, their cries shrill and unceasing. The men spread through the lanes, searching. At every corner, they expected to see it, the quick blur of fur, the glint of eyes. They swore they heard its feet striking stone just ahead, though when they ran forward the alleys twisted, folding back into the square. Again and again they pursued it, but always they came to the same place, circling like moths around a flame. The air grew thick with fear. The torches smoked, their sparks biting the night. In the flickering light, faces looked strange, hard, desperate, unrecognizable. Some shouted the hare's name as if it were a demon, others as if it were a saint. Children cried, begging their fathers to stop, but the men did not hear. And then panic broke. One torch fell, catching on the edge of a stall. The dry wood flared, spreading flame to a canvas awning. Shouts rose, buckets were fetched, but every path led only back into the square, into the firelit circle that tightened with each turn. Men dropped their ropes to beat at the flames, women ran with pails that seemed never to arrive where they were needed. Smoke curled upward, black against the night, as if sealing the village under its dome. When at last the fires were beaten down, the square lay charred and broken. Stalls were ruined, wares destroyed, the air thick with ash. No hare had been caught. In the silence that followed, no one spoke. The torches guttered out one by one, leaving only embers. The men who had led the hunt stood apart, their faces gray, their eyes hollow. The women drew their children close, as if the square itself had turned against them. And from somewhere in the shadows, no one could say from where, there came the faintest sound, the quick, light patter of a hare's feet on stone, circling once, and then gone. When dawn came after the night of fires, the village was quiet. Ash still clung to the stalls, the square smelled of smoke, and no one spoke of the hare. The people moved as if stunned, their voices low, their eyes averted. But by midday, the elders were gathered, called by fear more than by choice. They sat on the stone steps of the church, wrapped in cloaks, their faces furrowed with lines deeper than age alone. The villagers crowded close, waiting for words that might explain what had happened, or what was still happening to them. At last, it was the oldest man, Petro, who spoke. His voice was thin, but it carried. "This has happened before," he said. The crowd stirred uneasily. Mothers hushed their children. Men frowned, wanting to dismiss it, yet leaning closer all the same. Petro told of a story his own grandfather had whispered, a tale of another place where a beast, some said a fox, others a hare, had run through the market, and from that day the roads bent inward. The people there tried to leave, as these villagers had, but always they returned. They hunted the animal, as these villagers had, but it slipped from their nets. And each time they pursued it, the paths turned tighter, until the village became nothing but its square. The more they chased it, Petro rasped, the stronger the binding grew. Roads folded like cords, alleys bent like reeds. Until one day, there was no outside at all. The world ended at the market's edge, and the people had nowhere left to go. Silence fell heavy. The villagers shifted, glancing at the lanes that had once led them outward, now only bending back. What became of them? Someone asked. Petro shook his head. Some lived, though their world was no larger than a square. Others lost their wits, walking in circles until they forgot their own names. And the beast, here his voice faltered, the beast was still seen, now and again, slipping through shadows, reminding them of the day it had turned their lives inward. The villagers shuddered. Some muttered prayers, some spat, some cursed Petro for frightening them further. But in their hearts, they knew the truth of his words. They had already felt the tightening, the circling, the trap. And that night, when they lay awake listening to the silence of the square, more than one swore they heard it, the faint scrape of small feet on stone, circling just beyond the door. Seasons passed, though no one could agree how many. Without roads, without journeys, time was measured only by harvest and frost, by the weight of snow on the rooftops and the budding of leaves in spring. The square became the world entire. The stalls, once meant for trade, were turned into homes. Fishmongers slept where their wares had once been laid. The baker's cart became a table for children to learn their letters. Barrels that once held grain became stools, crates became beds. The square that had been a place of passage grew into the only place of dwelling. Fields were tilled in narrow strips along the edges, the ground hacked and seeded where cobbles gave way to earth. Sheep and goats were penned within the market itself, their bleats echoing against the stone of the church wall. The people spoke less of leaving, the word road grew strange on their tongues, like a memory that no longer fit. Yet no one forgot the hare. Some claimed to see it at dawn, darting across the cobbles, pausing by the well, its ears sharp against the light. Others swore they heard it at night, circling in the shadows, its feet quick and light. Children gave it names and chased it in play, though their mothers pulled them close, whispering that to follow it too far was to vanish forever. The elders stopped speaking of other villages. They no longer told stories of distant towns, of rivers that led elsewhere. Instead they spoke only of the square, how it had fed them, how it had endured. The world beyond became as unreal as a dream. But even so, in quiet moments, a heaviness lingered. Men sat by the well and stared at the lanes that led nowhere, wondering what lay at their ends. Women looked up at the church tower, its shadow falling always on the same stones, and felt the walls of their world closing tight. The square had become everything, yet it felt smaller each year. And so the people lived, turning inward, circling like their roads, until the thought of leaving was no longer a hope but a fable. And in the silence, from time to time, the hare would appear, slipping across the stones with the same calm eyes as on that first day, reminding them all of the moment their world bent back on itself, and the square became the only place left.